Hello and welcome to the Jubilate Chorale concert for spring 2019. This section of the program is a way of us giving you the program notes that those who attend the concerts live get to see in the program that they are given when they walk in the door. And since we can't give that to you who are watching by television, this is our way of providing you that extra information. Those of you who saw the last program will remember that Maxine Asselin told us that she was retiring after that concert. So today we have with us the man who is the interim director of the chorale while the search is being made for a new permanent director, John Marafa. John, welcome to
Nice to see you again.
the concert program notes section.
Glad to be here.
Now, John, you've been singing with the chorale for how many years?
This will be 23 years now.
23 years. That's a lot of us who are more white-haired than you are have been singing about that long, too. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been with Jubilate Chorale for 23 years. In the beginning, I was at Brockton High School. Got the music bug while I was there. Was singing in concert choir with Cade Dunlap at first, and then Penny Knight afterwards. When I was at Brockton High, I had approached Penny Knight, who was coming into her first year. I was a senior at the time, and I asked, if you need any help teaching any of the music to the choir, I'd be willing to help. And as a matter of fact, I have a piece that I'd like to try to conduct, and she let me do it, to her credit. So I've always had this in me to show people how to go through a piece of music in terms of choir singing and to teach them how to do it. Later on, I went to Westminster Choir College in Princeton, New Jersey. Found out about that on television. I was watching Channel 2, saw a performance of Verdi's Requiem, in which the Westminster Symphonic Choir was performing with Zubin Mehta and the New York Philharmonic. Found out that this was a school of music students and that they were performing with these orchestras from time to time. I was like, where is this place? And so had Cade Dunlap find information for me, saw the curriculum and the syllabus, and I said, this is for me. And so, because they taught voice, they taught conducting, they taught music literature, and I said, this is up my alley. So got the training there, received a degree in a bachelor's in music education. Thought that was the route that I was going to go to when I did my student teaching. Sort of figured out I really don't want to do that. So was sort of adrift a little bit. I conducted some church choirs, one in Franklin in particular, who I have very fond memories of, but had not jumped into Jubilate until a few years later. I knew there were people that I knew from my concert choir years in Brockton were singing with Jubilate Chorale. If you know Natalie West, okay, she's an old friend of mine, and Jim Hay, who is our accompanist.
Yeah,
I've known him.
There isn't a better one anywhere that I know of.
Exactly. I've known Jim since high school, and so we go way back. So it was good to have, in taking up this little interim position, to have someone that's so solid at the keyboard that I can trust. Yeah.
How did it happen that you became an assistant conductor with Jubilate?
Well, when I was singing with Jubilate, and Max was a wonderful director, but there was always some things that I was sort of itching to help out. And Max knows my background, and so and to her credit, I think she decided, well, let's utilize some of the background of the choral conducting background of some of its members. So she knew I was one. Sue St. Pierre was another. And then now you have Jillian, who's a new member. She's also she directs high school ensemble. So it's good to utilize the talent that you have, and also showcase it from time to time. So I was sort of itching to do it, and Max let me do it on occasion, and it's good to also show the other members of the choir what it is that I have in me, and they know they can trust me as well, being in front of them, as we trust Maxine all of those years.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the program now. I just wanted to ask you, the title for the program is called Americana. Can you explain how that came along?
Well, there is one large piece of music, five-piece song cycle by Randall Thompson entitled Americana, that is pretty much unlike anything that I've ever heard out of Randall Thompson. It is not it is not the rustic simplicity of his Frostiana, which are settings of Robert Frost poems. It is not the grandeur and patriotic fervor of his The Gift outright. It is something a lot more, how shall I put it? It's quirkier, it's a parody,
Yeah.
and the humor is very acerbic and even demented in some cases.
Let's keep that in mind, because we don't want to ruin the surprise for that, which will come up later in this series
Right.
of pieces.
Right.
Why don't we just get right into the first two pieces,
Right, exactly.
which are we doing together? It's The Invocation and Creation
By William Billings.
by William Bennings from his piece called The Continental Harmony.
Well, William Billings is a true American original when it comes to composing. He was, there were a lot of firsts with him. He was the first American composer to compile a work of like songs of music compiled by an American composer. He did that in 1770 with his first publication called The New England Psalm Singer. His second one was called the choir director, the director's assistant. Oh, I can't remember the name of it.
That's all right.
1778. But it's familiarly called Billings' Best. A lot of his best compositions are found in there, and this was his final bit in 1794, about 6 years before he died. He was a man that, he lost an eye at one point, and he was described as having also short one leg. Now, it's not entirely certain whether he was missing a leg or he had it amputated, or if he was just had one leg shorter than the other. It's not entirely known. There are no pictures of him, save one. There's an actual wood carving that was done by one of his friends by the name of Paul Revere. Did a wood carving of a bunch of men around a table singing one of his songs, and it's alleged that Billings is one of these men. So that and no one knows who it is, but he was someone who went around. He was a tanner by trade as far as his day job, but he had the conducting bug. He had the music bug also. Went around New England, through Boston, through Providence. He even conducted in Stoughton at one point, and has written a composition by that name. There is a composition called Stoughton that is out there. I might ask to conduct that one day. These two pieces are when it comes to Billings, he's very rugged in his delivery. His harmonies are very simple, but very earthy, and his rhythms are aggressive and just you can't help but sort of stamp your foot along.
Kind of like the Yankee Doodle of his
Sort of, yes. Although Yankee Doodle was not sure of much of the origins of that, but Yankee Doodle of his day, sure, I would say that, yeah.
And now, starting the concert off, the Invocation and Creation by William Billings. The next piece in the program is called Seal Lullaby by Eric Whitacre. John, what can you tell us about Eric Whitacre? He's a name I'm not familiar with.
Well, Eric Whitacre is one of the up-and-coming new young guns of choral music. He is very famous on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, you'll see lots of pieces that he has put together with virtual choirs. That is, he takes people will record sections of his pieces and send them to him, and then they get put together like thousands of voices. It's quite amazing. But he also an interesting story. He was playing in a band and when he was in college, and he was invited to sing with to do Mozart's Requiem. A friend of his invited him into the choir, and he said that moment changed his life, listening to Mozart. That he had not really learned how to read music, learned it much better, dove into and became a composer. He wanted, all of a sudden, all of these melodies in him started coming out of him, which is a neat story in and of itself. The story of the Seal Lullaby, it's a Rudyard Kipling story. He was approached by someone who invited him to Hollywood, to one of the major animated motion picture studios. They were thinking about doing an animated version of the Seal Lullaby. And so he started reading the story, the opening seal lullaby that the mother seal sings to her pup, and immediately got a melody, wrote it down, had his wife, who's a very good singer, had her record it, sent it into the studio, and then just waited. After a while, he didn't hear anything, and so he was wondering, well, did they not like it or whatever? Called the studio, and they said, oh, we're going to do Kung Fu Panda instead. So he had this piece of music, which was later another choral group commissioned him. He had the piece. He wrote it for a 4-part choir, and so it lives on. And it is it's one of those pieces that is just instant love for Jubilate. It's an easy piece to fall in love with, and they sing it beautifully.
And now, Seal Lullaby by Eric Whitacre. The next piece in the program is a piece called How Can I Keep From Singing? It was written by Robert Lowry, which is a name some of you may recognize. And not only that, it was arranged by one of the chorale's favorite composers, Z. Randall Stroop.
Z. Randall Stroop. He is a much sought-after clinician, choral conductor, and arranger, and he has written a lot of fantastic things for choirs that we fall in love with as well. This particular piece, How Can I Keep From Singing? The text is by Anna Bartlett Warner. Her story is interesting. Her uncle was a rector at West Point in New York at the military academy, and she herself conducted services there and was apparently very, very well liked and respected. Their home on the campus is now a museum and a national shrine. She wrote the text to this. It was picked up by another man, Robert Lowry. He was a pastor in New York and New Jersey, who also was a prolific hymn writer, has written several hymns that would be known by, if you go through your hymnal and you look at the name Robert Lowry, you'll be surprised at some of the hymns that he is famous for having written. Up from the grave he arose. He wrote that one. But this particular one he wrote, and it's been set by Z. Randall Stroop. It's the type of, it's again one of those pieces that the choir just falls in love with. There's a section for it for four-part men, hearkening back to the days of at West Point. Choirs there would probably have sung it, and so the male voices are featured prominently in here, especially at the beginning part. When the entire choir comes in, just glorious.
And now, How Can I Keep From Singing by Robert Lowry. The next selection is called Out in the Fields, and no, it's not The Who. It was written by William Levi Dawson. And who is this William Levi Dawson? Another name I'm not familiar with.
William Levi Dawson, black composer, was born in 1899 in Alabama. Very compelling story he had. He was kicked out of his home at the age of 13 in the Deep South, and he's a young black dude. So apparently one of the laws in Alabama, you could, at the age of 13, be admitted to a college so long as somebody paid for it. Well, he went to Tuskegee, who was run by another famous person, Booker T. Washington. Got a lot of help from him, got a lot of odd jobs to pay for his education. It was there that he got found his love for music, graduated from there, went on to get other degrees in music, and lived a long and rich life as a teacher, went back to Tuskegee and put together Tuskegee Choir, which went around the world performing especially spirituals and from the African American tradition. The piece that we're doing, Out in the Fields, the writer of the text, Louise Imogen Guiney, or Guiney, I think is her name. She was born in Boston, was a writer, poet, essayist. She could not make a living doing all of that, so her day job was she was a postal official in Boston. Eventually, she moved to England, where she became a critic and an essayist and an author there, and that's where she had died. William Levi Dawson had 2 marriages in his life. His first marriage, to whom this particular piece is dedicated, is to, it says, "In memory of my beloved wife, Cornella." Now, Cornella Dawson, they married in the late 20s in Chicago, when I think he was playing trombone when he was there, and after less than a year, she died very suddenly, and it was quite tragic. She was also a concert pianist. When you listen to the piece of music, it has got a very intricate piano part, which no doubt tells me that this was intended for her to play. And Jim does a wonderful job in it. I made sure Jim had a lot of things to do, and this was one piece that I knew that he would excel at. It's a piece that the poetry, it invokes God in nature, and is not so much part of the African American or Negro spiritual tradition, but there are lots of hints of it in there.
And now, Out in the Fields by William Levi Dawson.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a little something unusual for a spring concert. We have a sing-along with a hymn, and we're not going to tell you what the hymn is right now. We'll let you be surprised by it. While the chamber ensemble goes to their places, and they will be starting off with Deep River, which is an old traditional tune that we have sung many times.
Deep River is a old African-American spiritual. The Deep River is said to be the Ohio River because with the Underground Railroad of getting runaway slaves from the south to escape to the north, one of the big obstacles was the Ohio River, and so when it's getting across that. So as far as the song, Deep River, my home is over Jordan, I want to cross over into campground.
And anybody who knows the Jordan River knows it's not a terribly deep river.
But the Ohio is.
Yes.
So, and into campground. Campgrounds, a lot of campgrounds were the places where many black slaves would go to get information. They would, it would be under the guise of church services, some of whom even the masters would attend. But there would always be something that would be, some of the songs that they created would have hidden messages in them. And many of those messages have been lost to history. Some they know, and some they have forgotten. But simply, it is it's a peaceful and moving spiritual to perform.
Kind of an illusion of this crossing over that Jordan into the promised land.
Exactly.
Yes. And now the Jubilate Chamber Ensemble with Deep River.
At this point, we're going to be changing our arrangement up here, which means you're all going to be singing something. So if you would, take the hymnal, the blue hymnal in front of you, and turn to hymn number 578. Since we've done one hymn by Robert Lowry, which is How Can I Keep From Singing, why not do another one? That was very nice. Some of you should join us up here.
Our next selection is O Shenandoah, which is an old traditional tune from way back when, from Appalachia, if I remember right.
Well, in Appalachia, Mississippi and Missouri rivers, its origins probably go back to even Quebec, to early Quebec. When you look at the structure of the song itself, it's actually in the form of a sea shanty. A sea shanty will usually have an opening phrase that is sung by a soloist, and then there's a response by the other members of the crew. So with O Shenandoah, I long to see you, then the response, away, you rolling river. O Shenandoah, I long to see you, away, we're far away, across the wide Missouri. And that's sort of the form that this tune takes, is of a sea shanty. Although a more contemplative one, as opposed to as something, usually when people think of sea shanties, they think of work songs, rollicking, fast-paced. This is the more contemplative one.
Yeah, it wouldn't do for hauling up the sails.
Yeah. Now the story, O Shenandoah, it tells, if this is only, we only have a few verses of it in this version, but the entire story tells of a 7-year courtship of a white fur trader who is trying to convince the Algonquin chief Shenandoah to offer his daughter in marriage. And so as part of it, you hear there's again a section for 4-part men. O Shenandoah, I love your daughter, away, you rolling river.
Yeah. And now, O Shenandoah. The final piece for the chamber ensemble is a song called The Deer Chase, and it was written by somebody whose name we more associate with being a choral director, Norman Luboff.
Norman Luboff had a choir in the 1950s and 60s, which he made several recordings that became very popular during those times. He was someone who in Hollywood was hired to conduct and compose music for movies. So he took that tradition with him into choral works with the Norman Luboff Choir. No doubt, one of those recordings will have The Deer Chase on it. It is a fast-paced, very wordy piece of music that it quite simply describes a deer chase and all that it entails.
And I remember
Hounds,
hearing you...
horses,
Yes.
hills.
And I remember you hearing you say to the choir at the last rehearsal I went to that you've got to watch your diction, because if you don't, the words will get lost. And I was hearing that happening.
Yeah, it's easy to. That was one of their big assignments when I gave it to learn the words at tempo, in rhythm, and they've been doing a yeoman's job. We'll see how this one goes.
It can be difficult to get your mouth wrapped around some of those words. And now, The Deer Chase by Norman Luboff. And now we're back to the full chorale, and they will be singing a song called The Last Words of David, written by a fairly contemporary, although he is no longer with us, composer, Randall Thompson. And I must say, the first time I ever heard of Randall Thompson, I was singing for a choir that was being directed by a student of his.
Oh, wow. That must have been... You would have had some very good insights into the composer, no doubt.
Oh, yes.
Last Words of David was commissioned by the Boston Symphony Orchestra to commemorate Serge Koussevitzky's 25th anniversary for his directorship of that institution, and they commissioned Randall Thompson to compose it, taking text from 2 Samuel chapter 23. And it's the words of David before he passes away and give his kingdom to Solomon.
And now, the last words of David by Randall Thompson. And now the major piece of this concert, something we started talking about at the beginning of this program, Americana by Randall Thompson. And you can continue with what you were trying to say earlier.
Okay. Well, Randall Thompson is a type of composer that, you know, the serene, rustic simplicity of his Frostiana, or his grandeur and patriotic fervor of The Gift Outright, again, all Robert Frost poems, is nothing like that in Americana. It is a parody of sorts. H.L. Mencken years ago used to compile from various publications across the country into one called the American Mercury, and he had a section entitled Americana. And there would be stories. They would vary in terms of their type. Of the types that are in here, you have a quote from a notable person, a preacher in Seattle. You have question and answers from an advice column with a little bit of mysticism thrown in. You also have a leaflet that was put out by an organization called the NWTCU, which stands for the National Women's Christian Temperance Union. All right. So, and this piece was published in 1932. So, the prohibition was still in order at the time. The fourth piece is called, very provocative title, "The Sublime Process of Law Enforcement." Basically, consider a crime novel or crime magazine put on describing an execution in Arkansas set to music. Okay, how do you do that? Well, Thompson does an amazing job. And then finally, he actually sets to music something from an advertisement for a book of poetry from California.
Well, I suppose he could have done some kind of an ad for bald cures, because those things were around in those days too. Well, before we say goodbye, because what comes after this piece is going to be the encore, why don't we talk a little bit about the encore too, since that's going to be A Red, Red Rose by another wonderful composer,
of our favorites.
Mulholland.
Yeah, James Mulholland, who is still with us, thankfully, and he's still composing. James Mulholland, again, very sought after clinician, composer, gets commissions all over the place to write pieces, including our own choir. We have a piece called Timeless, which we commissioned for him for our, I think it was our 30th anniversary. So A Red, Red Rose is something that he wrote in 1980. So it's been around a while. It again is one of those pieces that was like instant love for the chorale. They basically, at a drop of a hat, you can put it in front of them, and they'll just give you a performance that'll just floor you.
And now, finishing off the concert, Americana by Randall Thompson, followed by the encore, A Red, Red Rose by James Mulholland.
Oh You have your attention, just one more moment. John has made quite the showing, quite the effort this season. We would just like to show our appreciation. So here we have the plaque. I will read it. Our sincerest thanks to John Marafa, to your friends, Jubilate Chorale, for your leadership, tenacity in directing us, and continuing to find the music in us. Thank you, John. Unsung hero. So we would like very much to be very proud to present a light plaque to our wonderful pianist and accompanist, Mr. James Hay.
Those of us who sing in choirs, again, they're our favorite composers of ours. This one, James Mulholland, he is a favorite of this group, and he is a favorite of our